Good morning, everybody. Welcome in the Awesemo NBA strategy show. We have a busy one today. 7 games on the slate tonight, including Adams, Wizards, my Sixers, and a bunch of other chalk plays, including some deep dives. Follow Adam on Twitter at ShipMyMoneyDFS. Follow me, Eytan, at Shander Show. What's happening, brother?
Not much. Excited. And Saturdays are fun. I love Saturdays. I think it's like the best DFS day. You have baseball all day. You have basketball at night. You have MMA. Get the early show, so then I'm off for the rest of the day. I enjoy Saturdays. I'm looking forward to doing the show.
Sounds like in basically the namesake of the show, that's your strategy, right? As far as get everything out early. Did you work hard for that here at Awesemo to make sure that you had the early morning shift so you could just kick back with the feet up?
Yeah, it was pretty easy for me because like Josh is like truly a yes man. So they ask him to do anything and he says yes, and I was able to just kind of like pick what I wanted more. So yeah, I made sure I got the Saturday morning. It used to be a tough show because I would just be hungover every Saturday and doing a show with BMAC, and it was rough. But haven't been doing that. Haven't been going out as much Friday nights, and it's made it a lot better.
So COVID has basically changed everything for you.
Exactly.
Maybe even arguably for the better. I love it. Today's show brought to you by No House Advantage. We continue to remind you, especially for these strategy shows, you want to subscribe. Make sure you don't miss anything throughout the day. Like what you see, hit that notification bell so you never miss a thing. All things awesemo.com. All right, my friend, we've got 7 games to dive into. We should start with your Wizards, right? We should start here with the highest total on the board as well at 247.5. I see it. Washington at Indiana. Know that there are a couple of big names here on both sides, right? Starting with the name, the chalk play in Russell Westbrook as far as money is concerned, and then Sabonis as well. How are we looking at this game, starting, of course, from the top, Adam?
I mean, it's kind of the same thing that we've been saying for weeks now. Like Westbrook's on the slate, just play him. The matchup doesn't really matter, but this is also a matchup that's great. Like you said, 247-point total. These two teams played, I think, last week and scored like 290 points or 295 points in regulation. Indiana's been the fastest team in the league over the last month. Washington's second fastest. They've been the fastest team for the season. Neither team defends well. It's just a great matchup, and Westbrook is still at this 11K price point that's just too low. I mean, it's obviously he's one of the most expensive guys on the slate, but the consistency, the upside, the floor, the minutes, like everything is there for Westbrook. It's just the same thing. We've been saying it sucks that there's an 11K player that is 50 to 60% owned every slate, but there's not a whole lot you can do about it unless you're just going to spot your opponent 65 points, hope he doesn't score 80, and find some other way to get there.
All right, so let's expect, and I guess there's no real reason to believe otherwise, that this game's going to have a lot of firepower. Clearly, on the other side of it, it's Sabonis, and you look over the last 5-6 games from a fantasy point standpoint, and high 40s, 48 is his low. So this guy clearly has been on fire. That's an understatement. Just running it back, both of them here at the top?
Yeah, for Indiana to some extent, well, actually, I guess to a lot of an extent, it does depend on their injury news because you do have Sabonis priced up now. I mean, he's up to 10.5 on DraftKings. If Malcolm Brogdon plays, Sabonis can still get there at that salary because there are going to be so many possessions in this game. It is such a good matchup, but it of course makes it a lot less likely if he's competing with Brogdon for touches. But if Brogdon's out, you have Sabonis basically running the offense. He's playing huge minutes, rebounding at a 20+% clip. Assist percentage is up over 20% without Brogdon. Usage rate is in the mid-20s, and he played 41 minutes last game against Atlanta. He played 43 minutes in a competitive game a couple games before that. You already saw, the ceiling, what he can do. He put up, I think, 75 DraftKings points against the Wizards the other day. So I think it's more, if Brogdon's out, it's more of like a pay up to be somewhat contrarian tournament option. But if Brogdon's in, if Brogdon's out, then even though there's some sticker shock, I think Sabonis is still at a very reasonable price point.
If Brogdon's in, and I know that we're still dealing with the Q tag and something to keep an eye on clearly throughout the day. And you mentioned just the productivity, really the usage going over even more so with Sabonis. But how do you play that from the angle of Brogdon going through the injury, the hamstring, knowing that it could be a short night for Brogdon, or it just could be a limited night for Brogdon based on productivity, even if he is out there a bunch of minutes?
Yeah, I mean, my expectation or my assumption normally in situations like that is that they're going to play close to their normal minutes unless we hear otherwise. And I assume that they're going to produce at the rate they normally do, mostly just because I think it's really difficult from a DFS standpoint to like guess when guys are going to be less efficient than normal or less productive than normal. So I would treat Brogdon pretty much like normal if he's back, but he's at a price point that will make him really tough to get to, especially at 9,300 on DraftKings. 8K on FanDuel would be, okay if you think he's playing full minutes, but there would still be a lot of risk there. So I think the biggest thing that Brogdon impacts is Sabonis and then Karis LeVert, who we know LeVert's ceiling is a lot higher without Brogdon as well. LeVert's become very expensive. So if Brogdon's out, LeVert is someone I think you can look at in tournaments. He still wouldn't grade out as well as Sabonis, I don't think, but the upside would clearly be there. If Brogdon's back, then I think it's really difficult to justify LeVert's salary.
All right, now your squad, Russell Westbrook must play. Put him in the lineup. That's not even a question at this point. That's just a reminder, right, Adam? Just like reinforcing playing Russell Westbrook. But where else can we find? I mean, I'm looking at Alex's boom bust probability here on the site and seeing a guy that I haven't talked extensively about since the tank back here in Philly with Ish Smith, super low cost. Is there anybody that you would look at from a really like a mind standpoint of value, a little deeper on the Wizards, knowing that you could get a pretty good return if in fact that low cost salary turns into a boom?
I think there's other spots you can go to here. It kind of depends on what contest you're playing. Like, I don't think that you're going to need to look to Ish Smith and like big in small field stuff. But if you're playing like larger fields, he is 3,300 in a game with a total that has almost 250 points. He's probably going to play 18 to 22 minutes. That's not something that normally would really stand out at all. But because of the extra possessions, if he plays 20 minutes in this game, it's more like he's playing like 24 or something like that in an average game at 3,300 for a guy that's relatively productive. Certainly not someone you're going to feel good about, but he's at least one of those guys at close to minimum salary that has a path to success. Davis Bertans played 30 minutes in regulation last game. He started the second half of that game. You had Rui out. I think he's supposed to be back today.
Yep.
I haven't.
Looks like he is. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. He's not on the injury report at all. So he should be back, which makes Bertans less appealing. So I think beyond Westbrook and of course Beal, I mean, there's nothing wrong with Beal either. He's playing 37, 38 minutes. The only reason he doesn't get talked about more is because you're allocating so much money from this team to Westbrook. But Beal, of course, gives you a really high ceiling here as well. Beyond that, there's not much that stands out unless, you're just kind of throwing darts at guys like Ish Smith. Bertans still certainly could get hot, probably will play 24 to 26 minutes. One other thing to look at, FanDuel fixed Rui's price. He was 3,900 last week, but he's up to 5,400. So I think it's pretty much Westbrook's the key piece here. Beal, of course, if you can get to him, great. And then, if you want to throw a dart at someone like Ish Smith, it's fine, or Davis Bertans, but they're not guys that are going to come through all that often.
Real quick, before we move on to the Sixers, I'm just curious if the situation, basically the last couple of weeks where the Wizards have exploded, not just as far as the win column, but mainly on the floor with points and productivity, if it changes or if a strategy like this already exists where you can justify stacking that backcourt, knowing that you're paying a ridiculous price, most likely, especially on DraftKings, but working out the rest of your lineup, knowing that, especially in a game like tonight with that ridiculous total, those guys are going to be putting in the majority of the work.
Yeah, I think you actually can. Normally, when you get two guys from the same team priced like this, I'm not really interested in playing them together outside of really weird circumstances. But when you think about Beal and Westbrook, for one, they just account for such a high percentage of Washington's offensive production. Like if this team scores 130 points, so much of that is going to Westbrook and Beal. But the other thing is that they don't really do the same thing. Beal's very scoring dependent, leads the league in points per game, or second to Curry. I don't know where they're at right now, but top two in points per game. Westbrook, he scores. He's averaging like 22 points per game over the last month, but so much of his fantasy production comes from his rebounding and his assists. If you have a game where Westbrook only scores like 14 points, he can still get you 65 or 70 DraftKings points. So you can have these games where Beal scores 42 and Westbrook only scores 14 real points, but then they go out there and, Beal goes for 55 and Westbrook goes for 70 fantasy points. So, and then, that's not even factoring in that they play at such a fast pace and this is such a fast paced game. So they are an unusual team where it's still not the first thing I look to do. Like I'm probably not starting a lineup with Westbrook and Beal together, but I'm not ruling it out. I'm not excluding them. I don't really have any issue if they do end up in the same lineup.
Make sure you continue, subscribe. You want to hit that notification button so that you get alerts for every show that we do, from the strategy shows right up to the live before locks. We're getting you ready throughout the day and really for the night slate here with Adam. So we move to game 2, and again, start here at the top with the Pistons taking on the Sixers. Sixers had a tight one towards the end last night against the Pelicans. Pistons had the night off. Joel Embiid is always going to be the topic, right? When you see that number at 10-7, under 1,100. I'll just say this. I don't know if it's worth it, mainly because on the back-to-back, the minutes, the expectation, he might need one of those 34, 36-point nights in like 20, 22 minutes, especially with the blowout factor involved here. Do you like Embiid?
I like Embiid, but the problem is just there's no shortage of guys to pay up for on this slate. So those concerns that you raised they're kind of brought, like they're even more important. It's not that you necessarily think the game's going to blow out. It's not that you necessarily think Embiid only plays 28 minutes, but the risk of that happening is something you do have to consider when you can pay for Westbrook, you can pay for Jokic against the Nets, you can pay for Curry, you can pay for so many guys that are in really, really good spots as well and produce similarly or better than Embiid and are probably going to play more minutes. You really need him to come in at low ownership if you're going to go there. And I think that he probably will. Like yesterday, Lofty and I kind of talked about the same thing. It was a game against a shorthanded Pelicans team where on the one hand, Embiid was likely to just go nuts for every minute that he was on the floor, but who knew he had such a wide range of minutes that he could potentially play in that game. And he came in tournaments at 3% owned, 4% owned. He put up one of the highest scores on the slate. So that's the kind of thing, you obviously can get from Embiid that makes it so he's a good play as long as the ownership is down there. If for some reason Embiid's getting, close, similar ownership to someone like Westbrook, then he's an awful play. But that's not going to be the case. And so, in tournaments, he does still have merit. It's just that you have to understand that it's one of those situations like when you play tournaments, you're trying to increase your chances of winning the tournament, not of necessarily making money that particular day. You're trying to win tournaments over the course of a season. And so making plays like that in tournaments, they are good ideas because you're giving yourself, a very low owned player that has the chance to be the highest scoring on the slate. You just have to understand the probability of it happening that one day is pretty low. And that's why his ownership is as low as it is.
Yeah, I see it at 4%. Again, right now, early on, the 62% for the bust percentage might scare some people off as well, looking at that. And I'm trying to walk that line between, Lofty as the insufferable Philadelphia fan and, somebody that you could at least tolerate. I know that from, the internal element, we don't even talk football, which is a good thing, right? So at least basketball, we could separate the two and I could enjoy watching your squad. All right. Now, I'll say just personally, I imagine just because the numbers have been low, that even at 7,500, Ben Simmons might be too big of a risk.
Yeah, he just grades out for me, at least, as like a mediocre play pretty much every slate, regardless of matchup. It's just there's always, especially this time of year where you get teams resting players and you get so many, high scoring games. It just seems like Simmons never really fits the build that I'm making, even at his reduced salary. He still has a ceiling. Like he's cheap enough now. I mean, Ben Simmons can go triple double. He could, actually score like 10 points in a game for once or something. But at the same time, it's just,
right.
There's so many guys at this point in the season where you look and you're like, yeah, they're a little bit overpriced, but they have a really high ceiling. And I think a lot of those guys end up grading out even better than Simmons does. So it's kind of a situation where like, I'm not going to tell anyone not to play a $6,900 Ben Simmons, but he just, as weird as it sounds, and it's something that if you had said at the beginning of the season, it would have sounded very surprising, but he just kind of is a guy that's there. And I don't really feel strongly one way or the other about him.
I've got him at 7,500 on DraftKings, so I imagine that's even more of a stay away if you're paying that price.
Yeah, I mean, the scoring on DraftKings is a bit more favorable for him because you get the double-double, triple-double bonus. You get, you're not penalized for turnovers as heavily. So I think it makes sense that the salary is a little bit more expensive. But yeah, it's still just the same feeling as I have on FanDuel.
Yeah, he's had a bad, especially for doubles and triple doubles. It's been a really down year. So if you can't get that return, all right, somebody's going to score points here. It's a pretty decent sized total here. It's a 10.5 point, one of 3 double-digit lines as well. Is the default now to Tobias Harris?
I do like the salary on Harris. I think that, he's $400 less expensive than Simmons on DraftKings. He's actually got small forward and power forward eligibility, which is typically pretty valuable. It's normally more difficult to fill those positions than it is to fill the point guard position that Simmons is at. So you have more flexibility with Harris than you do with Embiid or Simmons. I still doubt he ends up being a priority just because of how roster construction typically goes. Like I would expect that in most of my lineups, I end up getting 2 of those stars in there, which is going to, naturally force me to get some cheaper guys in. And you don't necessarily end up in that Tobias Harris or Ben Simmons price range. But if you're kind of just ignoring the way roster construction goes and just talking about salaries and plays, I think Harris looks good here. You've seen in general, the Philadelphia team is priced down because they've been in so many blowouts lately. And so it's, their average production lately has dropped their salaries a little bit. It makes it so there's a high ceiling for these guys if this game actually is competitive to the end.
All right. So on the flip side, let's just approach this more of a blowout standpoint, more of a top bench getting minutes productivity standpoint. If we're already building off the lineups where you're overpaying or you're paying a high price for some bigger names and you're trying to mine a guy in that scenario just laid out in this game, look, Shake Milton could get you 30, 35 points if there are extended minutes. He has that capability. I wouldn't bank on it on a nightly basis, but I wonder at 4,200 on DraftKings, if you did need somebody lower on the bench, if that name would pop out, especially with Korkmaz questionable going into tonight.
Yeah, I mean, if you forced me to take someone from Philly's bench, it has to be either Milton or Howard, basically, because they're the two guys that produce.
I'm not forcing you, to be fair. I want the stream to know that. I am not forcing Adam to take anybody on the bench.
I mean, so like just kind of like from a broader strategy standpoint, like if you're, for whatever reason, like if you're going that route, you want to look for the guys that produce at a high per minute rate, because then you're just trying to get lucky with their minutes, basically. Whereas if you go to someone like Matisse Thybulle, one, you have to get lucky with his minutes. Two, you have to get lucky. He has to play like the best NBA game he's ever played. With Milton, with Howard, you just have to get lucky with the minutes. Milton needs to play, 5 or 6 more minutes more than people think he's going to for one reason or another. Howard needs to pick up 5 or 6 more minutes than he normally does for whatever reason. But that's all you need to happen, and they're going to be good plays. So strategically, like that's what you're looking for there. And from the Sixers, that does point you to Howard and Milton. It's still just a really low probability thing, and they're not really that cheap. Like, for example, Milton, just from the games we've talked about so far, Milton's 4,200. Ish Smith is 3,300. I don't think either one's a very good play, but if I'm going to gamble on one, I would rather take the one that's 75% the cost.
Fair enough. Now, as far as the other side here, and I don't know how much time we need to deep dive with the Pistons where the value is, but I don't know. Also, if you ever play or like the narratives, you got a guy in Sadiq Bey coming home to Villanova. And maybe again in blowout minutes, or just in fact you're down, it's a little easier to score. Is Bey a name that may jump out to play if anybody jumps out to play on this Pistons team?
Yeah, actually, I had no idea he went to Nova, but yeah. So with the Pistons, I mean, we're still waiting on news here. The nice thing about them is once the news breaks, we kind of know how to approach it because we've seen every iteration of them tanking that we can get, I think. Yes. But but right now you have Diallo out, you have Josh Jackson out, Magruder and Dennis Smith Jr. out, but you have Ellington questionable, Jeremy Grant questionable, and Corey Joseph questionable. If Jeremy Grant plays, it kind of throws a wrench into everything because not only does he take minutes, but he takes production from guys like Sadiq Bey. He takes some rebounding and some usage even from like Isaiah Stewart. But if he sits, and Mason Plumlee's not even on the injury report, so I guess he's back.
Yeah, I have him at 6,300, right? Yeah, he looks fresh.
Yeah, so I mean that takes Isaiah Stewart off the board. It seems like this is going to be a slate where the Pistons are actually less appealing than normal. But if Grant sits, it does open up more minutes for Sadiq Bey. If Corey Joseph sits, it opens up minutes for Killian Hayes, although he's up to 5,300. Dom Boya's price tag came up to where he shouldn't be really relevant. Like he'll probably start if Grant is out, but I'm not really interested in him one way or the other at 4,600. So I actually think the Pistons today are pretty unappealing. Mason Plumlee in tournaments, I could see it because he's actually recently, when the few games he has played, he's actually been getting decent minutes, and he's a very productive player when he plays, without all of these other guys on the Pistons. So like if you get a situation where Grant is out and Plumlee starting, I could see rolling the dice on Plumlee, but you still have to keep in mind it's a brutal matchup here. There's no shortage of good plays on this slate. So still not anything I'd be really excited about. Overall, I think the Pistons are probably less appealing today than they have been in weeks.
Take it for what it's worth. It looks like Yahoo's saying that Grant does plan to return tonight. So let's assume that Grant is in the lineup. You're looking at 6,900 right on DraftKings. Is there any appeal knowing that Grant's playing just for Grant?
Sort of, because I mean, it's really tough because that he's going to get all the opportunities that he wants. Like there's nobody out there that's going to stop Jeremy Grant from shooting, basically.
Right.
But how many minutes does he play? Does he go out and play the 36 minutes we were getting earlier in the year, or does he play 30? Because if I'm getting 30 minutes of Jeremy Grant at 6,900, that's not really that appealing. If you go back and look at the games he's played, I mean, he hasn't played since April 26th, but he played 28 minutes in a blowout against Atlanta, 34 minutes the game before that against Indiana. So that's at least, in the range of outcomes. I still think he's a pretty low probability play just because of the combination of really difficult matchup and playing time volatility, basically ranging from like 28 to 35 minutes.
I remember you want to make sure you get access to everything we're doing here. The Awesemo Plus tools, even more so. You can get everything you need and then some for every DFS sport. It's just $29.95 for the Awesemo Plus weekly package. It includes full access to all of the premium tools today. What's available for you from us on the Awesemo Plus platform, player projections for the NBA. So you can take everything you're listening here from Adam and balance that out with the player projections, come up with the top lineup. We want you to win money. That's the bottom line here. And that's why we provide an even deeper dive for you at Awesemo Plus. And just NBA DFS, don't worry, the Awesemo Plus NBA weekly package that runs $16.95 or the $4.95 NBA Weekly Express, and that gives you full Awesemo Plus access, NBA Showdown, single game contest. Stop guessing, start winning money. Join Awesemo Plus today. All right, let's move. We got our squads out of the way now, and we actually did that in pretty good timing here. I was concerned that one of the two, probably me, just getting caught on the Sixers would drag out here, but Toronto is down everybody. And I imagine that the obvious name to go to, I mean, he's right there at the top for Alex's boom bust probability here at Malachi Flynn, and 41% owned as well so far. So how do we balance the projection of Flynn, especially with their backcourt out, with just being heavily owned?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is he's pretty cheap here and the backcourt is out. So we've kind of seen his minutes disappear recently, but that was in games where one of Van Vliet or Lowry was playing. Like, for example, the game against Washington the other day, I thought there was a decent chance that he would start in place of Watanabe, but instead they went with Stanley Johnson. But you had Van Vliet in that game. So now it would be pretty surprising if Flynn doesn't slide into the starting lineup. You could potentially see DeAndre Bembry. That is something they were doing previously before Flynn started getting his starts. But for now, I'm assuming he starts. I'm assuming you get like 32 or so minutes from him. And he's just, cheap enough where I think, yeah, he's going to get a lot of ownership, but he's just pretty clearly underpriced to be the primary ball handler on this team.
So outside of that, I mean, I'm 9,000 I see for Siakam. So the productivity, right, the usage is going somewhere, right? In OG's out as well. We know that. So is 9,000, I imagine it's a direct reflection of the expectations of so many guys around him being out and priced up on DraftKings. Is that too much for you, Adam?
I don't want to say it's too much because I think it's where he should be, if not a little bit cheap. But it'll still, I don't know yet how easy it's going to be to get him into lineups when, like Westbrook at 11K is still a bigger priority. Guys like Jokic and Curry, I think, are probably still bigger priorities. But he's played 286 minutes this year without either one of Van Vliet or Lowry on the floor. 1.25 DraftKings points per minute, 27% usage rate, 20% assist percentage, 11% rebounding percentage. And the other thing is that he's probably going to play like 40 minutes. I mean, he played like 36 in regulation against Washington the other day, but typically, you're seeing 38 to 40 minutes in a lot of these games. So you're getting 1.25 fantasy points per minute for 38 to 40 minutes. He deserves that price tag. If he were cheaper, he would be in like every lineup. So I think he's priced where he should be. He's probably still a little bit underpriced. It just kind of comes down to, are you able to fit him in along with the true like superstars on the slate?
Are we venturing into Detroit territory here where outside of Flynn, which just appears based off the price as well, that you want to work him in there? Maybe a more difficult, as you laid out, justification for Siakam, and then it's pretty much, is that it? Are you looking at a guy even like Gary Trent? Is there anybody else that you're looking at on this squad that could provide value, or is it really just as top heavy as it seems, especially with all the injuries?
Yeah, I'm interested in Trent here. He's someone that I think picks up some extra usage without those guys in. He's played 252 minutes without them on the floor since coming over to Toronto. He's got a 24% usage rate. He's averaged 0.93 DraftKings points per minute. He's scoring dependent. He's not going to give you a lot in the way of assists. He's not going to do a whole lot of rebounding, but he is going to get more looks most likely without those guys on the floor. So he's pretty cheap. On DraftKings, he gives you guard and forward eligibility, which is really useful. He's someone I think kind of just could be used sort of like as a glue guy, just to like fill your lineups together, like a last piece in type play. And then DeAndre Bembry at 3,500, probably not the worst spot to gamble on. We've seen, him not really be a preferred option in Nick Nurse's rotations recently, but now you take, you have Watanabe not likely to play. You have both of the starting backcourt out. It's pretty likely, I think, that Bembry picks up a few more minutes here. And at 3,500, it's risky, but I think that there's still at least a path to success because he is someone that handles the ball. He is likely to be, if he doesn't start, he's likely to kind of be the backup point guard off the bench. So Bembry's not the, not the worst risk to take.
All right. On the flip side, I saw a bunch of people on the stream leading up to this game, big on Memphis. And again, you're going to be able to take advantage, ideally, of Toronto being down significantly. Only a 5-point line I see, knowing that Memphis is laying it on the road, still 227. So make what you want of it, but it would look like we're venturing into a convincing victory for the Grizzlies, at least as far as projection is concerned. So we've got the big names at the top, right, from Ja to Valanciunas. Is there anything top heavy, at least, to start with, knowing that those are pretty manageable prices for what would be expected based on a lot of the other names that we've spoken about as far as their price and what they're attached to, high level price?
Yeah, I mean, I think Morant and Valanciunas are both fine. They're more so tournament plays for me. Like I can't imagine them like landing in a cash lineup as far as like your top projected lineup or anything like that. But I think they're a little overpriced for their average outcome. But both of these guys are so capable of throwing up monster games. I mean, Valanciunas going up against Kem Birch and a basically depleted center position in Toronto. This is someone that averages like 1.35 DraftKings points per minute for the season. It's just a matter of playing time, but he's been getting 30 to 32 minutes in competitive games recently, which is really good to see. You certainly can see a monster game from him at a reasonable price tag. John Morant played almost 37 minutes last game, so it's nice to see his playing time trending up a little bit. Earlier in the season he was stuck in that like 30 to 31 minute range, but as his playing times increase, so is his salary. So still someone we know can go out there and throw up a monster game, but just a little bit less likely at his price point than I think some other options are.
So two guys to look at a little deeper here in this game where you're getting a cheaper price clearly for both Brooks and Melton. And I wonder, and basically minute dependent, right? Both of these plays would be based off of minutes, but at least Brooks, despite having a rough shooting night, is getting the minutes. I just don't know if Melton gets those minutes in order for it to be a payout.
Yeah, so for Melton, he's one of these guys, and we talk about it a lot. The playing time is extremely volatile. For whatever reason, Memphis just isn't playing him as many minutes as they probably should. But from game to game, like any given game, he can still go out there and get 24 minutes. And if he does play 24 minutes at this price tag, there's a good chance he's someone that helps you win tournaments. So whenever players like that are popular, it can be a pretty good idea to just, find alternatives and hope that it happens to be a game where he plays 13 minutes like last game. But like right now, he's projected for 6% ownership at 3,900 on DraftKings. To me, that's a spot that's pretty appealing to roll the dice on because there's not that many players in that price range that offer the same fantasy production as the Anthony Melton on a per minute basis. So, you're taking a chance. If he plays 15 minutes, he's probably not going to give you a score that's very useful. But if it happens to be one of those games where he does pick up additional run, then, you're in a really good spot. The thing that concerns me, though, is that in their last game, you had Grayson Allen out. Melton only played 13.9 minutes. You had John Concher play 19.3 minutes off the bench. I don't know why, but if he's going to be in the rotation, if he's going to be an actual part of the rotation, it does make it less likely that Melton gets those minutes, gets the minutes that you want him to. And the other thing that's concerning is that was a game where Desmond Bane only played 21 minutes. Typically, Bane's playing 26, 27 minutes in his starts. So the kind of like, the idea behind the Anthony Melton is that in the games where Desmond Bane plays fewer minutes, Melton should play more and should pay you off. We just saw a game where Bane didn't play his normal minutes and Melton still didn't pay off. So the risks are really, really high. But, right now, a 6% ownership, 8% chance of being the optimal lineup on DraftKings. The reward is probably worth the risk. The risk is just really high.
Theodore Parson on the stream calling it now. Jaren Jackson double. You in?
I like it.
Yeah?
Yeah, I mean,
5,700 for
I don't like the
DraftKings
price
price?
tag. I don't
No,
like the
too
price
much?
tag. It's yeah, I mean, it's just he's okay. I think if this were a slate earlier in the season, I'd probably have more interest. It's just that I think on this slate, you're going to be able to find enough. You're going to be able to find enough guys that are like 1,500 to 2K less expensive than Jaren Jackson that are risky and give you upside without having to go to a mid-range guy who's risky. Like, it is really nice that we saw Jackson play 25 minutes last game.
Right.
You know, you've been seeing that in games where he's not in foul trouble, that he can get 24 to 26 minutes. He's a very good fantasy producer. So I do think that he can outperform his salary. It's more so like, can he outperform the salary by more than some of the other guys on this slate? Because there are so many high scoring games here. There are so, you know, it's May basketball, so there's going to be so much value. Even if Jaren Jackson goes and gets you like 34 DraftKings points at 5,700, that's a score that typically you're happy with, and earlier in the season would be very good. But when you're talking about slates where, you know, you're having teams, you're having lineups approach 400 fantasy points or exceed 400 fantasy points, getting 30 something points at 5,700 isn't actually that useful.
I was mentioned our show today brought to you by No House Advantage. It's a different and amazing, really fun and profitable way on DFS. It's all player prop contests and across the board, NBA, MLB, NFL, PGA, all cash prizes. The playing field has been leveled here due to No House Advantage. And what I love about this is stuff locks in, bets lock in. You're not worrying about fluctuation like with the books. So, for example, we talked earlier about a game in the Sixers, right? Pistons, Seth Curry, as up and down as he may be overall from a DFS productivity standpoint, he's knocking down threes, at least 3 threes in 4 straight games. So if you see a prop like that, you know it's going to lock in at 2.5. Let's say you pound the over. You don't have to worry about the books and all the volatility that comes with that. So over 500, as you see, player prop offerings. No House Advantage is the largest provider of player props across the board in the entire industry. And the best part is that you'll receive a $20 first match deposit bonus. Just use our code Awesemo, AWESEMO, and I love it. It's definitely a nice, refreshing alternative to the player props, because you know how that works, man, right? You lock in something, or you think, all right, 2.5, and then the juice changes or the odds change if you don't bet it right away, and you lose value with the books. You never lose value here, which is from somebody who bets. I love that.
Yeah, I think another good thing about it that doesn't really get talked about, like, my expectation at least is that this format kind of is like the future of DFS, that you start getting tournaments where, you know, you're betting props against each other or stuff like that. So I mean, this is a way where you're getting experience in that format very early on, in a format that I think is going to grow and become a huge thing. So it's, you know, good from that standpoint as well.
Yeah, you know, I didn't look at it like that, where getting into something now, that curve, right? You're not going to have that steep of a learning curve when it becomes normalized. You're not looking around like, you know, what's an NFT or a prop shot or something. You're not asking those questions. What's that?
Right.
What's No House Advantage? You already know. You've been making money off of it.
Right. Like I can't play yet living in Maryland. I think I'll be able to within the next year, but like, I already know that I'm going to have to like build all new stuff that I don't, you know, use on DraftKings, don't use on FanDuel. And so it's like, as this gets bigger, you know, you can be someone that has been doing this and you already have an idea and an idea how to win at it. You already have a strategy, or you can be someone jumping in, you know, in 2 years or whatever, when it's like the norm, and saying, oh, well, you know, how do I play this? And kind of, you know, learning on the fly where you're at a disadvantage.
Now, are you playing Steph Curry tonight, already locked in with Russell Westbrook at 11K? We know that that's a steep backcourt right now. If so, or depending on, I guess it wouldn't be based off of where you have it with both in the point guard, unless you want to run utility, right, or guard. So are you running these guys in the same lineup tonight, or has Westbrook pretty much locked up guard play due to the cost?
I hope so. I would love to have them in the same lineup. And this is one spot to pay attention to ownership. You know, obviously Westbrook, I think, is the best pay up option, hands down, but ownership is still a thing. You know, like, for example, if you knew Westbrook was going to be 100% owned, you would just, you know, play Curry. But so obviously there's like a sliding scale there. And one thing that you have seen, especially if you're playing smaller field or higher stake stuff, is recently Westbrook's been like 75 to 80% owned in those tournaments. So it does start to get to pretty crazy levels when you do have someone like Curry that has a similar ceiling. He's averaged like 1.7 DraftKings points per minute in the games without Oubre. His usage rate in those games is almost 40%. He has a 70% true shooting percentage, which of course is going to come down, but it just reiterates, I mean, someone as efficient as Steph Curry that has a 37 to 40% usage rate in any given game and is playing in a fast-paced game against Oklahoma City, the ceiling's still massive. And the reason I bring up the ownership is I think that there is obviously blowout risk in this game, but that's something that people factor in. I know the other night, it was on the slate with, I think, Westbrook, Luka, and Curry were like the three main pay up guys. Westbrook in the smaller field stuff was like 75%. Luka was like 50, and then Curry was like 12% against Oklahoma City. If you're going to get something similar to that, Curry's going to look really, really good, because I mean, this is someone that can go out there. You saw it in the last game. He barely even played in the fourth quarter, poured in 34 actual points through 3 quarters. The game was semi-competitive into the fourth. He came back in, but then didn't do anything, and they got him back out of there as the game got a little bit more out of hand. But, the point being, he's got a massive ceiling here. So pay attention to the ownership. Again, if he's projected to be similarly owned to Westbrook, just play Westbrook. Ideally, you can get them both together because there's going to be enough value. But if you do start to get, a 75 to 15% gap or something in ownership between Westbrook and Curry is a perfectly fine alternative.
It's not the full season sample by any means, but 4 of his last 6, he's gone 35 or under. 3 of his last 6 under 35, because one of those is 35 minutes. I'm talking minutes, and still the productivity is there. So again, as far back as you want to take a sample size, just looking at something more recent, it looks like he has become less and less victim of circumstance with minutes, especially. And again, I go back to the whole blowout factor, which is, and I see it with Embiid, somebody has to put those points up in order for you to be up 25, 30 points.
Yeah, it's typically riskier to take someone from the team getting blown out than doing the blowing out. It seems like it sticks in people's head, like, oh, I got screwed because my guy didn't play the fourth quarter, and he was on this, he was having this monster game, but he didn't play the fourth quarter. He didn't play the fourth quarter because he was having a monster game. It kind of goes hand in hand. Like, the guy that normally scores 1.5 fantasy points per minute scored 2 fantasy points per minute for 3 quarters. That's why he didn't play the fourth. So it kind of evens out. If Golden State's scoring so many points so quickly that they don't bother playing Steph Curry in the fourth quarter, there's a very good chance Steph Curry had a massive first 3 quarters.
Now, I'll separate what happened to me taking this Draymond Green prop the other night and just look at the overall productivity that we've been getting from a fantasy standpoint, knowing that he's just all over the place across the board, going to fill some stat sheets at 7,800. I see on DraftKings. And, at that point, if it's not Draymond, then we'll start having to look a little deeper here for somebody that may jump out for Golden State.
Yeah, I really like Draymond. I mean, you've seen him produce at a really high rate without Weissman. He benefits from Oubre being out as well, because the entire offense benefits from Oubre being out. So, his rates go up. He's averaged 1.08 DraftKings points per minute without Oubre on the floor this year. That's second highest on the team behind Curry. He's in competitive games playing 36 minutes. You saw 32 against OKC last game, but he lost about 4 to garbage time. Massive ceiling because of the triple-double upside he gives you. Rebounds really well. He's got a 33% assist percentage in his minutes without Oubre on the floor this year. So I think Draymond looks really good. I think Wiggins is fine. Reasonable price point, fast-paced game, pretty scoring dependent, and obviously, not Steph Curry levels of efficiency, but he'll play a bunch of minutes as well. Even Kent Bazemore, should play 30 to 32 minutes here. Not the best price tag on Bazemore, but 5,700 I think is still fine if you end up in that price range. So I think there's a lot to like here. Curry, of course, being the priority. Then I would say Green, followed by Wiggins and Bazemore.
A lot to like here. Can we apply that same phrase to the other team?
Absolutely not.
Do we just move on or
no? I mean, OKC is really, really tough right now because they're playing so many guys. In their last game, they played a legitimate 11-man rotation.
Ridiculous.
Moses Brown, Dort, Baisley, Maladon, Roby, Hall, Bradley, Jerome, Deck, and Charlie Brown Jr. all played at least 15 minutes. None of them played 30 minutes. So it just gets really, really difficult to look to a team like that. If you're going to go there, Isaiah Roby's still inexpensive and starting, but you're probably going to get like 26 minutes from him. The thing that makes it difficult, even at his price tag, is this isn't Isaiah Roby starting at center like you were getting earlier in the year. This is Isaiah Roby starting alongside Darius Bazley and Moses Brown, who are both gobbling up rebounds and making it so Isaiah Roby is sort of just standing in the corner. It was something that I played a lot of him a couple slates ago when he started for the first time, and watching the game, it was just really frustrating because it was like, okay, I need a big game from Roby, and he's literally just standing in the corner watching the game happen. So you're not getting those peripherals from him. He's not a high usage guy. So the price tag is low enough where there's certainly the potential for him to put up a big game in a fast-paced game, but it's relatively unlikely. You get a decent ceiling from Teo Maladon and Bazley and even Dort, but just with the rotation they're running right now, I think it's really difficult to prioritize anything here because it's just so unlikely that any of them play big minutes.
All right, so I'll appeal to that. And again, this is the smallest of sample sizes we have here. And I know that when I do the show with you, it seems, and OKC is on the slate, it seems like more than one person on the stream likes to insert Moses Brown into the dialogue here. But at 4,900, 9% ownership, he did play 30 and 28 minutes respectively in back-to-back games for him. So that's the only reason why I bring him up, Adam, is because you actually have a pretty decent chunk of minutes over the last 2 games for Brown. Anything there, or let's just move on? Your
he
call.
Intrigues me in tournaments because he has averaged a little over a fantasy point per minute as a starter this year. He has, the minutes have been all over the place. I mean, it's not that long ago that he was starting and playing 18 minutes, but like you said, he's played 30, he's played 28. He can certainly put up a big game. Like it's still risky. It's not something I love, but yeah, there is at least a path to success here if he does play another 28 to 30 minutes.
All right, Blazers host the Spurs. We can look here at San Antonio before we get a little deeper into some obvious plays, or maybe not so much for Portland. But when you look at if it's DeRozan, if it's just maybe Murray at the top of this list, the Spurs themselves have been struggling mightily. I know they get that win, but it hasn't looked good overall for this team. So I wonder if there's any cloud that may hang over this team that would prevent you from playing somebody, even on top of, let's say, price or ownership.
Not really. Like nothing outside of price or ownership, but I don't think price and ownership is that appealing. Or I guess, price in particular. We know DeRozan can give you a big game. DeJounte Murray can give you a big game, but they're priced appropriately. This team is basically with the exception of Derek White, they're fully healthy, and the pricing I think reflects White being out to some extent because Murray's up to almost 8K, DeRozan's over 8K. They both are capable of giving you 50 fantasy points, but to me that's not really enough of an argument on a slate like this to really be overly interested in someone because there's a lot of guys that can do that. So they're kind of similar to me to like your Jonas Valanciunas and John Morant's, where I don't love the price. I certainly see how they could have success here. The matchup's not bad against Portland, but there's just kind of like a list of guys that I think I'm going to get to before them. Lonnie Walker started and played 35 minutes last night, but he's not the most productive per minute player. Played 33 minutes, not the most productive per minute player. Maybe worth a dart throw if you're playing a lot of lineups at 4K, but again, it's just nothing that really stands out to me here from the Spurs.
Could you throw a dart at Rudy Gay?
He's
maybe like one of those big, thick, like automatic game dart boards that you have, the electronic ones, right?
The one where it always bounces out.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to get 22 to 24 minutes. He's going to produce 1 to 1.1 fantasy points per minute. It's just, I think you're probably going to get a lot of guys in that price range that are able to outperform Rudy Gay on the slate.
All right, so we've mentioned 2 guys already in the backcourt as far as their price, and keep an eye on their ownership. So let's throw Dame here into the mix already with Russ and Steph mentioned. How does Dame hold up across the board now?
I think it's going to be really, really tough to get to him at that price tag. The ceiling is really, really high. We know that, especially because, Portland needs to win games. You saw Dame play 39 minutes last night. I would expect you're getting something similar tonight if this game's competitive. The problem is kind of twofold. His average projection for his salary just doesn't compare to guys like Westbrook and Curry that aren't that much more expensive. The other problem is that because there are so many players at the top tonight, the ownership argument doesn't hold quite as much water. Like if for example, if you only had Westbrook, Curry, and Lillard on this slate, and you knew Westbrook and Curry were just getting massive amounts of ownership and Lillard was going to be like 5%, you could make the argument that Lillard's going to beat them enough to be a strong play, and it would be true. The problem is that not only do you need Lillard to beat those guys, You need him to beat Jokic. You need him to beat Embiid, Sabonis, Durant, Irving, all of these guys. And because there's so many guys, they're not all going to get a lot of ownership. So basically you're going to get, we already talked about Embiid, for example. Embiid produces like 0.3 more fantasy points per minute than Damian Lillard. And you already have Embiid at 4% ownership. So if you want to take a risk on an expensive guy that has a high ceiling, why would you choose Lillard over Embiid?
I'm just curious, and it's something you brought up more so with Steph, but we can apply it in, as you mentioned, on the shorter game slate as well. Where do you have kind of a cutoff? If you have 2 guys or 3 guys you're looking at, and it is something where you're factoring in ownership, let's say somebody's 80%, and that next option, same price or similar price range, is at 65%. Is there a number that you would look at, even that, and say, okay, you know what, 65 would be too high, and let me move to a third option? Or is it basically contingent, I guess, on the player itself? Which makes sense, but I'm just curious if you had kind of a number that you look at.
Yeah, I mean, it's contingent on the player and what's around them. I mean, my stuff is very similar. What I have built is very similar to the boom bust tool that we offer, which I think is like the most useful thing that you can use, because it all comes down to, I mean, when you think about what you're trying to do, it all comes down to when you talk about ownership, it's completely dependent on their chance of being in the best scoring lineup. Like if someone is 70% owned, but he has a 90% chance of being in the optimal lineup, 70% is too low, even though it's a crazy high number that a lot of people would look at and say, oh, I don't want to roster a 70% owned guy. If he's 70% owned, then he's got a 40% chance of being in the optimal lineup. He's over-owned, but he still has a 40% chance of being in the top lineup. So a lot of times you're going to want to take a stand somewhere else, pivot off a different popular player. But it all just kind of comes back to comparing, like you can in the boom bust tool, comparing their chance of success versus their chance of being in the best lineup. And then, the larger field tournaments you're playing, you do want to factor in raw ownership as well, just because you are competing against so many people. But overall, it just kind of comes back to, if Westbrook has an 80% chance of being in the best lineup, that's going to make me willing to put him in all of my lineups, basically. If Curry has a 40% chance, it kind of like if you're just looking at Westbrook and Curry, just take like a 2-player example. Like if Westbrook is twice as likely to be in the optimal lineup, but he's getting 5 times the ownership, then it's a situation where you don't necessarily have to make that pivot, but you at least know it's a positive move to play Curry instead. So you can kind of use it that way too, if you're trying to gauge between a few players, which is kind of what it comes back to when you're talking about Lillard and all these other options. When you look at that, it's reflected, they're all going to have the non-Westbrook, the non-Currys, they're all going to have a low chance of being in the optimal lineup, but they're also, a lot of them are going to have low ownership. But when you have someone like Embiid that projects higher than Lillard, if they're both going to be like 4 to 5% owned, normally you're going to just want to take Embiid because he projects better and you're getting the ownership discount.
I want to play Nurk at that price. I'm just worried about the minutes. Now you've got me thinking minutes, right? When it comes to even a price tag at 7,200 for Nurkic, is there value there? Should we be looking a little more so at McCollum, a little higher at 8,000, but at least that there's safety in minutes played?
Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing that you have going for you with the Blazers. You're going to get a ton of minutes from Dame. You're going to get a ton of minutes from McCollum. Nurkic is going to give you 29 or 30 if the game's competitive, and we know that he produces at a high rate. The problem is kind of just that, Nurkic's price point is expensive enough where I think it's tough to prioritize him there. McCollum, I think you're just going to get, sort of better options. And then again, if Dame were still 9,200, I'd be really interested. But now that he's up over 10K, it's going to be really tough to get to him as well. So I think the main value that Portland offers is, like, if you do have a really popular lineup, you can plug in a Lillard or a McCollum or a Nurkic and just, have someone that is capable of scoring a lot of points at low ownership. But because there's already a lot of those options on the slate that we've talked about, it's just going to make it so, like, normally they're still not the guys that I end up going to.
Reminder, of course, as we continue to do each and every time you see us, our faces here, is to subscribe, hit the notification bell. You don't want to miss anything. The strategy shows are designed to get you ready throughout the day so you can come back and match the analysis, the insight that you get from Adam with late news that comes out with injuries and all. And Awesemo Hall of Fame is another thing that I just love watching and seeing how this continues to blossom here on the platform. It's a very simple way for you to get recognized, to get the notification of going out there and crushing the competition. So just tweet your wins. But first, you need to make sure that you have the picture. You need to make sure that you have the Awesemo profile downloaded. So just do that at awesemo.com/avatar. As you see, tweet your wins at Awesemo HOF. You can win a free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. And we continue to just see all of the different, look at that, no house advantage on the board there. So another opportunity to win some big money on No House Advantage. That's the sponsor of today's show. And then tweet it out there so that you get the full recognition. You no more humble brags, just brag away. But you want to make sure that you have the Awesemo profile pick up there as well. This is amazing, man. Just every day, every show I do, we see new wins, new victories, and people bragging away. And even if they're not bragging so much on the tweet, just to have the picture out there is a little reminder that what you're doing, what you're saying is working. Isn't that a nice little reminder, Adam?
Yeah. It's always nice when you wake up and you get tweets with people that won, and it's like, oh, cool, like they're doing well. And then you look at how you did, and you're just like, screw them. But it's nice to see people win for sure. How
often is that? I know we have two other games to get to real quick, but I'm just curious. How often has that happened where it's something that you've said on the show? It's almost a lineup that you've essentially built on the show, but you've gone gut or instinct otherwise elsewhere. And you wake up, and of course, it's the advice. Now, I guess at the end of the day, right, for your job, it's great. The track record is there, but does that happen often?
Yeah, I mean, it's not. And I don't say that in a way like that I'm taking credit, but yeah, it happens to where it's just like, oh, like this is what I verbalized, and it's not what like I ended up putting together. Yeah.
I love it. All right. Rockets still playing at that incredibly fast pace. The Jazz still down a couple of guys, including, of course, right there at the top, Donovan Mitchell. So as we wind down here, these two games, let's start with Houston, and then we can kind of move into the more obvious plays with Utah. Christian Wood is a guy we're going to have to keep an eye on. So I guess everything really centers around Wood, no pun intended, right?
Yeah, I mean, this whole team, I don't think we really know right now who is playing, because we didn't know who was playing until like an hour before the game yesterday. And then, of course, we don't have an injury report since they played yesterday. So a lot here just depends on, Christian Wood, who was questionable and then sat, but also, do they rest guys that did play yesterday? Jayshawn Tate was a game time decision yesterday and didn't play. Does he play today? So, yeah, I think there's just a lot of moving pieces right now.
So, okay, let's look at the Jazz. And I wonder if Gobert is just too heavily priced here. I see it 8,800 on DraftKings for what could be a return of anywhere from like 20 to 55. And I don't know if the blowout factor or just if it's a rough game, depending on what could happen. It just seems like it could be too much to have such a volatile return.
Yeah, I think it's kind of it's probably going to be pretty difficult to prioritize an $8,800 price tag on Gobert. If you build a lineup that you like that has Gobert, then by all means, it is a good spot for sure against Houston. If the game is somehow competitive and you get 33 minutes from Gobert, he's likely to give you a good score. But I think you're paying for that upside at this point at 8,800. And the same kind of goes for Jordan Clarkson and Joe Ingles and even Bojan Bogdanovic. They benefit from Conley and Mitchell being out, but they're also priced for them to be out at this point. You haven't seen an increase in peripherals for Jordan Clarkson. He's got a 30% usage rate in the games without Conley and Mitchell, but still only about a 14 or 15% assist percentage, averaging a little over a fantasy point per minute. Ingles averaging a little bit over a fantasy point per minute as well, getting there differently, a 37% assist percentage, only a 21% usage rate. Both of these guys probably play 32 to 34 minutes if the game's competitive. The matchup is really good. I don't mind mixing in some Clarkson and Ingles in tournaments, but I think they're expensive enough. They don't really stand out as priorities here.
Bogdanovic drop a little bit at 6,700. Are we starting to hit territory where maybe you can get a better return for the buck that you're spending?
I think there's just going to be better options elsewhere. I mean, Bogdanovic, again, he has a high ceiling here. His usage rate without Conley or Mitchell is up around 24%, but he doesn't contribute a lot outside of scoring. It's just kind of, he can get you 40 plus if he shoots well, but he's kind of priced to where like you need that to happen. And so I think he's a little bit overpriced. I don't mind Niang at 3,600 as a value option. Not something that you're super confident in, but he has been starting. He played, 24 minutes last night. I think his range of playing time kind of runs from like 24 to 30 minutes, depending how he's playing, how the game's going, all of that. Taking a cheap guy in this matchup against Houston is something I'm actually pretty interested in.
So looking real quick before we hit that final game, Kelly O 8,600. I mean, my goodness, you're basically anticipating that even if Wood plays, right, that Olynyk is going to be the vehicle for points and productivity on this team. And I just don't know at that point if it's worth it.
Yeah, I think it's really tough. For me to get to Olynyk that price tag, I think you need Houston to have like 8 or 9 guys again. He's been really, really productive overall since joining Houston. He's 1.2 DraftKings points per minute. That goes up when you take guys like Porter and Wood off the floor. So, I mean, if you're getting the team that you had yesterday, for example, you know Olynyk's going to play 30 plus minutes. His assist percentage is enormous without those guys on the floor. He rebounds, he scores. It's still a brutal matchup. He's still at a price point where he really needs to get 50 plus fantasy points for you to be happy that he's in your lineup. So there's risk, even if they're shorthanded, but I'd be at least somewhat interested in taking that risk, assuming the ownership's relatively low, if they only have like 8 guys again. But if you start putting Christian Wood in there, if you put Kevin Porter in there or something, like I'm not paying that salary for Olynyk if they're even remotely healthy.
Last game, make sure you're following on Twitter, Adam at Ship My Money DFS, at Awesemo NBA, and at Shander Show for me. Couple of big names here on the slate. 3 guys, 10,000 or more, from Irving, Durant, all the way up to Jokic on DraftKings. We mentioned Embiid already, but hey, as somebody in Philly, as somebody, pardon me, rooting for this team, I'll step aside and say this has got to be the Jokic player over Embiid. As we've already seen, both guys are capable of putting up a ton of fantasy points in a small amount of minutes.
Yeah, I think it's Jokic over Embiid, for anything outside of ownership considerations. So it's sort of Jokic is the better play. Like, he projects for more minutes. He projects for more fantasy points per minute. He's averaged 1.7 DraftKings points per minute in the games without Jamal Murray. The matchup here against Brooklyn's a pretty good one. So he's ahead of Embiid. You certainly, if you have a chalky lineup and then you have the money for either of them, you can play Embiid. Like, that is a very reasonable pivot. It's one that, if you played the slate 1,000 times and you just made that move, like, you're probably going to come out ahead. But it's not like it's a necessity. Like, it's not, if you're not taking the ownership discount on Embiid, you're doing it wrong or something. Like, Jokic is a phenomenal play. And chances are, because there's so many pay up options, he's going to be reasonably owned. Like, he's going to be higher owned than Embiid, but you're going to have Westbrook just dominating ownership. And then you're going to have like a next tier where it's Curry and Jokic most likely. So it's not like you're going to get, astronomical ownership on Jokic, I don't think. So I think Jokic looks great here. He should play 34 to 36 minutes, assuming the game's competitive. 1.7 DraftKings points per minute on average, like I said. And he's just so difficult to stop because of, he's so good at everything. He's a really good scorer. He can score around the rim. He can shoot threes. If you double him, he's going to just hit guys for wide open threes, or he's going to hit cutters for layups. He's basically impossible to stop. So absolutely love Jokic.
Yeah, I see him at 21% owned now. And I know that, especially with this larger slate, the cost of it, but are you looking maybe at a threshold to where if he hit a certain number, it would default back to Embiid?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Like, right now, we have him with 21% ownership, a 14% chance of being the optimal lineup. The thing that's interesting to me is that we have him with a 13.7% chance of being the optimal. We haven't beat it over 10%. So just based on, just based on those numbers, Jokic really shouldn't be that much higher owned than Embiid. I don't know if maybe those numbers change throughout the day. I don't know, if I particularly agree with them, but obviously, I'm going to trust Alex running the data over me sitting here at 10 in the morning and just throwing shit off the top of my head. So,
well, think about it though. Embiid is always I know that he doesn't sit every other game still like he used to, but he's still a wild card for back-to-backs. He's still a wild card for, he could be a scratch in 2 hours all of a sudden, although, for rest or something. Like, things could still come up, even if it's not a scratch, Adam, so much as he comes out there, they're up, and he sits the majority of the second half in somewhat like a quasi rest night. So I don't know. There's so many different variables around Embiid with his health and just how they treat him that Jokic doesn't have hanging over him.
Right. And that's the thing for me too. That's kind of why, like, when I look at it, I'm like, that seems a little high, but again, like, I'm going to trust what Alex is doing with numbers, ahead of what I'm doing, just sitting here looking at them. But, yeah, you do have a lot more variables. I think, like, with Embiid's rotations, does he run a little bit shorter rotation? It's possible. But the point here being, Jokic right now, I don't think the ownership is anywhere close enough to where I would be looking to get away from him. If you told me that he was going to be 50% owned or something, I would probably say, okay, I'll start, for sure looking to some of these other guys that are priced up there. But, if you're only getting 20% ownership or so on Jokic, I have no issue with that.
Michael Porter Jr. clearly going to be a source of offense needed tonight if, in fact, this is going to be a close game, which I think a lot of us anticipate. Where does he lie as far as how eager you may be to get to him tonight?
I think he's a really, really, really good play on FanDuel. He's 7K on FanDuel.
Wow.
I don't know how or why, but he's 7K at small forward. The guy is playing like 38 minutes in competitive games. He's averaged 1.1 DraftKings points per minute without Murray. It's kind of a no-brainer on FanDuel, I think. On DraftKings, it's a lot more difficult because he's priced up to like 8,700, I think it is. 8,700. And so it's just a price point that I think is really, really difficult to get to. But on FanDuel, for sure, just I think phenomenal play.
Are you playing either, both, neither Durant, Irving tonight?
I think either are fine. Durant, I think, is the better play. Like, he projects higher. He averages more fantasy points per minute than Irving. One thing that kind of concerns me, and I haven't gone back to look at it, it's just sort of anecdotal from having Durant in my lineups and paying attention to his fantasy scores. He's been doing nothing in fourth quarters lately. I don't know if that is just, fluky, like he's missing shots or whatever, or if Kyrie's just decided the fourth quarter is Kyrie time. But if that's, that's something at least that I'm going to pay attention to going forward, because, we talk a lot about usage rates and average production and stuff like that. And Durant has been the better fantasy producer when he's played with Kyrie and without Harden this year. But a lot of the appeal, he would lose some appeal if in competitive games down the stretch, if Kyrie's going to just take over, he's going to lose some appeal there. So that is something to keep in mind. If you're kind of losing fourth quarters, Durant's going to project a little bit lower, but I'm not willing to say that's the case right now. It's just something that's kind of on my mind after seeing him, I think, combined for like 5 fantasy points in the last 2 fourth quarters.
Maybe it's the fresh sting that I still feel from losing that in-game cover, but I think it was that Suns game where you have to go back to where he was productive in the fourth, because I remember watching him kill me in game on that. But yeah, I mean, I take your word for it, especially somebody who's been playing him, because it seems like for at least a little bit, there's been that drought. So beyond the top 2, I guess Joe Harris would be a name that would jump out with offense, and knowing that they're still trying to fill that third void consistently, on a nightly basis. At 5,200 on DraftKings, is Harris or maybe even Jeff Green up front a better option at 4,800?
I don't really see anything else from Brooklyn as far as the secondary options go. It's just, Denver's a slower team, so it's a pace down spot. When you have Irving and Durant both playing, that's where most of the usage is coming from. So I don't really love the pricing on those guys. I think if I'm going to go to cheaper guys from this game, I would look to, Paul Millsap from the Denver side, who played 26 minutes last night, played 24 minutes the game before that, still only 3,800 and his average 0.9 DraftKings points per minute as a starter this year. You still have Austin Rivers playing around 28 minutes. He's not very good, but you're getting 28 minutes. Even JaMychal Green, backing up Millsap, and actually, has been productive off the bench this year. Played 20 minutes yesterday. Again, not someone that I'm very confident in, but I think I would say Millsap is probably the best of the cheap options in this game, followed by Campazzo and Austin Rivers.
All right, brother. Flew by. Appreciate it as always. Thanks to everybody watching. Now you're done, right? Make sure you follow Adam Scherer on Twitter at ShipMyMoneyDFS. He's going to have his feet kicked up and watch as much sports as humanly possible and keep an eye on all his lineups. Is that an accurate assessment of how you're going to spend Saturday?
Yeah, pretty much. Driving down to my mom's to spend the weekend there for Mother's Day. And then, just watching sports and hopefully winning money.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for everybody out there. Awesemo watching. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. You never want to miss a second. Have a great, happy Mother's Day weekend. And good luck tonight.